Your Honor, we have an urgent situation in Courtroom 12. The court clerk's panicked whisper made everyone in the packed gallery look up from their phones. Something catastrophic was about to unfold in Judge Rebecca Sterling's courtroom. 18-year-old Amara Washington sat in handcuffs, motionless, as Judge Sterling prepared to destroy her future with a sentence so harsh it would ignite a national firestorm. What the judge didn't know was that in exactly 23 minutes, one phone call would obliterate her career and expose the justice system's darkest secrets to millions of viewers worldwide. Have you ever witnessed someone make a decision so biased, so devastating, that it revealed the entire broken system for what it really is? Judge Rebecca Sterling adjusted her black robes with the practiced precision of someone who had wielded absolute power for 17 unforgiving years. At 49, she commanded Courtroom 12 of the Hamilton County Superior Court in downtown Portland like a military general commanding troops. The local newspaper had dubbed her the Iron Gavel after she'd sentenced a 16-year-old to adult prison for stealing a bicycle. Her supporters called her exactly what the community needed to clean up the streets. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany benches packed with defendants, families, and court observers. Today felt different somehow, charged with an electric tension that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Sterling's bailiff, Officer Marcus Rodriguez, stood at attention near the defendant's table. In his 12 years working courthouse security, he'd learned to read Judge Sterling's moods like weather patterns. Today's forecast? Severe storms with a chance of devastating sentences. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Sterling, announced Court Clerk Jennifer Martinez, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Amara Washington sat perfectly straight in her Orange County Jail jumpsuit, her dark hands folded in her lap despite the heavy handcuffs that bound her wrists. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, and her brown eyes remained fixed straight ahead, not flinching under Judge Sterling's withering gaze. To Judge Sterling's experienced eye, Amara fit a familiar pattern. Young, black, probably from a broken home in East Portland's rougher neighborhoods. Another statistic waiting to happen. Another life that needed the firm hand of judicial correction before it spiraled completely out of control. Amara's court-appointed attorney, David Chen, shuffled nervously through his case files. At 28, he was still new enough to the public defense office to believe he could make a difference, still naive enough to think every client deserved vigorous representation. He'd reviewed Amara's case 3 times the night before, and everything about it screamed for leniency. First offense, honor roll student, college-bound with a full scholarship to Oregon State University. This should have been simple. Community service, maybe probation, definitely not jail time. But David had appeared before Judge Sterling enough times to know that logic and proportionality weren't always her primary concerns when it came to young defendants who looked like Amara Washington. In the third row of the gallery, 24-year-old digital activist Zoe Nakamura discreetly adjusted her phone's camera angle. She ran a popular justice activist account called @CourtWatchPDX, where she live-streamed proceedings to expose inequality in the justice system. Her usual audience was small but dedicated, maybe 300 followers who cared about criminal justice reform. Today felt different, though. Something about the energy in the courtroom, the way Judge Sterling's eyes lingered on the defendant with barely concealed disdain, the nervous energy of the court-appointed attorney. Zoe's instincts, honed by 2 years of courtroom observation, told her this case was going to be memorable. She started her live stream with a simple caption: Judge Sterling about to sentence 18-year-old first-time offender. Something feels off about this one. #JusticeWatch, #CourtWatch. The viewer count started at 47 people. Scattered throughout the gallery were the usual courthouse observers, journalism students from Portland State University, retired court watchers with nothing better to do, and a few family members of other defendants waiting for their cases to be called. In the back row, Amara's grandmother, 72-year-old Dolores Washington, clutched her purse with white knuckles. She'd raised Amara since she was 3 years old, after her daughter had died in a car accident. Dolores had watched her granddaughter graduate as valedictorian, earn a full academic scholarship, and get accepted to pre-law programs at 3 universities. Now she was watching that same granddaughter sit in handcuffs over what should have been a minor mistake. "Ms. Washington," Judge Sterling began, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "You have been charged with possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. How do you plead?" David Chen rose quickly. "Your Honor, my client pleads guilty to simple possession. The prosecution has agreed to drop the intent to distribute charge in exchange for the guilty plea." Judge Sterling's eyes narrowed. She'd been hoping for a fight, a chance to demonstrate her judicial authority. "Mr. Chen, I wasn't addressing you. Miss Washington, I asked for your plea." Amara stood slowly, her handcuffs clinking softly. "Guilty to possession, Your Honor." "Speak up. The court reporter needs to hear you clearly." "Guilty to simple possession of marijuana, Your Honor." Amara's voice was steady, respectful, giving Judge Sterling no excuse for additional hostility. But Judge Sterling didn't need an excuse. She'd already made up her mind about this defendant the moment she'd read the case file and seen the mugshot. "Miss Washington, the arresting officer's report states that you were found with 2.3 ounces of marijuana in individual packaging. That suggests distribution intent, regardless of what the prosecution claims." Prosecutor Angela Foster, a 15-year veteran of the district attorney's office, looked up from her notes with surprise. "Your Honor, we've already amended the charges based on the evidence. The amount was consistent with personal use over time, not distribution." "Miss Foster, are you telling the court how to interpret evidence?" "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then please remain seated while I conduct this sentencing." Zoe's live stream viewer count climbed to 156 as people shared the link. The comments section began filling with observers noting the judge's unusual hostility. Judge Sterling leaned forward, fixing Amara with a stare that had broken stronger defendants. "Miss Washington, where are your parents today?" "My grandmother is here, Your Honor. She raised me." "And your father?" Amara hesitated for just a moment. "He couldn't be here today, Your Honor. He's working." "Working where, Miss Washington?" "He's in Washington, D.C., Your Honor." "Washington, D.C., Judge Sterling repeated the words slowly, savoring them. "Let me guess, construction work on government buildings? Kitchen staff at one of the hotels? Maybe janitorial services?" David Chen started to object, but Amara's quiet voice cut him off. "No, Your Honor." "No? Then what kind of work keeps a father from supporting his daughter during the most important day of her life?" The courtroom was dead silent. Every person in the gallery leaned forward, sensing something significant happening, but not understanding what. "He's a federal employee, Your Honor." Judge Sterling laughed. Sound like breaking glass. "A federal employee. How convenient. Miss Washington, in my 17 years on this bench, I've heard every excuse and every lie. Young defendants always claim their absent fathers have important jobs, when the reality is quite different." Dolores Washington gripped her purse tighter, her eyes filling with tears of rage and helplessness. Zoe's live stream exploded with angry comments. "This judge is completely out of line. She's just making assumptions. Someone needs to stop this. This is disgusting." The viewer count hit 423. "Your Honor," David Chen said, standing with more confidence than he felt, "I'm making assumptions about my client's family situation that aren't supported by the evidence. Miss Washington graduated as valedictorian of Lincoln High School and has a full academic scholarship to Oregon State University. She's exactly the kind of defendant who deserves a second chance." Judge Sterling's eyes flashed with irritation. "Mr. Chen, academic performance doesn't excuse criminal behavior. Some of the most dangerous criminals I've sentenced were intelligent. Intelligence without moral guidance is often more dangerous than simple ignorance. She turned back to Amara. Miss Washington, what was your plan for the marijuana you were carrying? Personal use, Your Honor. Personal use of 2.3 ounces? That's a 2-month supply for a heavy user. Were you planning to share with friends? Sell to classmates to pay for college expenses your scholarship doesn't cover? No, Your Honor. It was for personal use over time. I don't believe you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In my experience, young women from your background don't purchase large quantities of drugs for personal use. They buy them to sell. It's a pattern I've seen hundreds of times. Angela Foster shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The prosecution had specifically declined to pursue distribution charges because the evidence didn't support them. Judge Sterling was essentially conducting her own prosecution. Your Honor, David Chen said, trying again, my client has no prior arrests, no history of drug sales, and was cooperative with police during the arrest. She made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve to have her future destroyed over it. Mr. Chen, it's precisely because she doesn't have a prior record that this sentence is so important. This is our opportunity to prevent her from developing a pattern of criminal behavior. Better to intervene harshly now than to see her back in my courtroom in 2 years facing serious felony charges. Zoe's phone was getting hot in her hands. Her live stream had reached 847 viewers, and the comments were coming so fast she couldn't read them all. People were screenshotting the judge's comments and sharing them across social media platforms. Judge Sterling pulled up Amara's file on her computer, making a show of reading through it slowly while the entire courtroom waited in tense silence. Ms. Washington, I see here that you live with your grandmother in the Jade District. That's a high-crime area. Lots of gang activity, drug dealing, violence. Not exactly an environment that promotes good decision-making. Your Honor, Dolores Washington called out from the gallery, her voice shaking with emotion. That's our neighborhood. We've lived there for 30 years. It's a good community with good people. Ma'am, you're out of order. Bailiff, please remind the gallery that outbursts will result in removal from the courtroom. Officer Rodriguez stepped toward Dolores with obvious reluctance. Ma'am, please remain quiet during proceedings. Dolores nodded but didn't sit back down. She remained standing, a 72-year-old woman facing down a system that had already decided her granddaughter's fate. Judge Sterling continued reading from the file. No father listed as emergency contact. Mother deceased when defendant was 3 years old. Raised by maternal grandmother in single-family household. Classic indicators for future criminal behavior. That's enough. Amara's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip crack. Every head turned toward her. David Chen grabbed her arm, trying to keep her seated, but Amara shook him off gently. Ms. Washington, you will remain silent unless directly questioned by the court. No, Your Honor, I won't remain silent while you insult my family and make assumptions about my life based on racist stereotypes. The courtroom erupted. David Chen tried to pull Amara back down into her seat while Judge Sterling's gavel crashed down repeatedly. Order, order in this courtroom. Zoe's live stream viewer count shot past 1,200 as people frantically shared the link. This was becoming something much bigger than a routine sentencing. Ms. Washington, you will sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt of court and add jail time to whatever sentence I'm about to impose. Amara remained standing, her chin raised defiantly. Your Honor, with respect, everything you've said about me and my family has been wrong. Every assumption you've made has been based on bias, not facts. That's it. Bailiff, restrain the defendant for contempt of court. Officer Rodriguez moved toward Amara reluctantly, but she raised her hands peacefully. I'm not resisting, Officer Rodriguez, but I think Judge Sterling should know something before she continues with this sentencing. Ms. Washington, you are in contempt of court. Anything you say now will only make your situation worse. I don't think it can get much worse, Your Honor. You've already decided to destroy my future based on assumptions that are completely wrong. Judge Sterling's face flushed red. Ms. Washington, you will be silent or I will have you gagged. You asked about my father, Your Honor. You made assumptions about what kind of work he does, what kind of man he is, what kind of family I come from. I don't care about your father, Miss Washington. He's not here, which tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. Amara smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone about to reveal a devastating truth. My father couldn't be here today, Your Honor, because he's currently hearing oral arguments in the case of Thompson versus United States at the Supreme Court of the United States. The words landed like a nuclear bomb in the silent courtroom. Judge Sterling's pen froze over the sentencing document. What did you say? My father is Justice Malcolm Washington. He's been on the Supreme Court for 6 years. The silence that followed was so complete that everyone could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling vents. David Chen's mouth fell open. His case files scattered across the floor as his hands went limp. Prosecutor Angela Foster went pale, realizing she'd just witnessed a fellow legal professional commit career suicide on live stream. Officer Rodriguez stepped back from Amara, with his hand moving instinctively away from his restraints. Zoe's live stream viewer count shot past 2,000 as people shared the link across every social media platform imaginable. Comments flooded in faster than the app could process them. Supreme Court Justice's daughter! Judge is finished! This is going viral right now! Someone screen record everything! Justice Washington's daughter! Judge Sterling stared at Amara, her mouth moving wordlessly like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible, she finally managed. Amara reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. Would you like me to call him, Your Honor? He should be finishing up his morning session right about now. The entire courtroom held its breath. That won't be necessary, Judge Sterling said quickly, but her voice was shaking now. Actually, Amara said, her voice steady and calm, I think it is necessary. You've spent the last 20 minutes insulting my family, making racist assumptions about my background, and preparing to sentence me to a punishment that will destroy my future. I think my father would be very interested to hear how his daughter is being treated in your courtroom. She began dialing a number with steady fingers, while 2,500 people watched via live stream. Ms. Washington, please put the phone away. There's no need to... Dad? It's Amara. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm in court right now, and I think you need to hear what's happening. The phone was on speaker now, and Justice Malcolm Washington's voice filled the courtroom. His tone was instantly recognizable to anyone who'd watched Supreme Court proceedings, deep, authoritative, with the measured cadence of someone used to choosing every word carefully.
Amara? What's wrong? I thought your hearing was just a formality for community service. It was supposed to be, Dad. But Judge Sterling here has decided to sentence me to jail time for a first offense possession charge. She's also spent the last 20 minutes making assumptions about our family, saying you're an absent father who works construction or janitorial services in D.C. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Justice Washington spoke again, his voice could have frozen volcanic lava. Put Judge Sterling on the phone, now. Judge Sterling stared at the phone on the defendant's table like it was a coiled rattlesnake. Zoe's live stream had reached 3,847 viewers, and notifications were flooding in from major news outlets requesting permission to rebroadcast the feed. "Your Honor," David Chen said quietly, "I think you should take the call." Judge Sterling's hands were visibly shaking now. 17 years of absolute power in her courtroom, 17 years of unquestioned authority, and it was all about to end because of assumptions and bias that had been exposed in front of thousands of viewers. "Judge Sterling," Justice Washington's voice carried absolute command even through the tiny phone speaker. "I'm going to ask you once, and I want a precise answer. What exactly did you say about my daughter's family?" Judge Sterling's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "Justice Washington, sir, there was a misunderstanding about—" "What did you say about me, Judge Sterling?" The courtroom was so quiet that people in the back could hear Judge Sterling's rapid breathing. I made some assumptions about your employment that were incorrect." "What assumptions, Judge Sterling? I want you to repeat exactly what you said about my daughter's father to this courtroom full of people and the thousands watching online." Judge Sterling's career was ending in real time, and everyone knew it. The iron gavel, who had terrorized defendants for 17 years, was being reduced to a stammering, terrified woman facing the most powerful judge in America. I suggested you might work in construction or janitorial services. You suggested that because my daughter is black, her father must be engaged in manual labor. Is that correct, Judge Sterling?" "Sir, I never meant—" "Answer the question. Did you assume that because my daughter is black, her father must work in a low-skilled profession?" Judge Sterling closed her eyes. "Yes, sir." "And what sentence were you planning to impose on my daughter for a first offense possession that the prosecution recommended for community service?" 18 months in county jail." The gasp from the gallery was audible. Even by Judge Sterling's harsh standards, 18 months for first offense possession was extreme. "Judge Sterling, in how many cases involving white defendants have you imposed 18 months in jail for first offense possession?" Judge Sterling couldn't answer because they both knew the number was 0. "I'll be making some phone calls today, Judge Sterling, to the Oregon Judicial Commission, to the State Bar Association, and to several civil rights organizations. This proceeding is over." The line went dead, leaving Judge Sterling alone with a courtroom full of witnesses and a live stream that had reached 5,000 viewers. Zoe's phone was burning hot in her hands. Major news outlets were flooding her DMs. #Judge Sterling was starting to trend on Twitter. Local news vans were reportedly already en route to the courthouse. Judge Sterling looked around her courtroom, her domain, her kingdom where her word had been law for 17 years. She saw David Chen staring at her with a mixture of shock and pity. She saw Prosecutor Foster typing frantically on her phone, probably alerting her superiors. She saw Officer Rodriguez avoiding eye contact entirely. And she saw Amara Washington still standing tall and proud, despite the handcuffs, despite the orange jumpsuit, despite everything Judge Sterling had tried to break her spirit. Court is in recess," Judge Sterling managed to say. But everyone knew the truth. Court wasn't in recess. Judge Sterling's career was over, and the real justice was just beginning. The silence in Courtroom 12 stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Judge Rebecca Sterling sat frozen behind her bench, staring at the cell phone that had just ended her 17-year career with surgical precision. The phone's black screen reflected the overhead lights like a tiny mirror, showing her the distorted image of a judge who had just committed professional suicide in front of 6,847 live-stream viewers. Amara Washington remained standing, her handcuffed hands steady despite everything that just transpired. Her brown eyes held something that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. Not victory, but vindication. She had endured Judge Sterling's racist assumptions, her grandmother's tears, and the threat of 18 months in jail, all while knowing she possessed the power to end it with a single phone call. "Your Honor," David Chen said quietly, "I believe my client is entitled to immediate release pending review of these proceedings." Judge Sterling blinked rapidly, as if waking from a nightmare. "Yes. Bailiff Rodriguez, please remove the defendant's restraints." Officer Marcus Rodriguez moved toward Amara with obvious relief. In his 12 years of courthouse security, he'd never seen anything like what just unfolded. As he unlocked Amara's handcuffs, he whispered, "I'm sorry, miss. We should have known better." Amara rubbed her wrists where the metal had left red marks. "It's not your fault, Officer Rodriguez. You were following orders."
In the gallery, 72-year-old Dolores Washington finally allowed herself to breathe. She had watched her granddaughter face down a corrupt system with the courage of someone twice her age, and she had never been prouder. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she clutched her purse with shaking hands. Zoe Nakamura's phone had died, but not before her live stream had been screen recorded by dozens of viewers. The videos were already spreading across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook faster than wildfire. Hashtag Judge Sterling was trending nationally, and major news outlets were frantically trying to verify the story. Judge Sterling's personal cell phone buzzed on her desk. The caller ID showed a number she recognized with growing dread. Oregon Supreme Court Chief Justice Patricia Morrison. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Angela Foster said carefully, "I think you should answer that." Judge Sterling's hand trembled as she picked up the phone. "Chief Justice Morrison?" "Rebecca, what the hell is happening in your courtroom?" Chief Justice Morrison's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I have Justice Washington on the other line, and he's describing judicial conduct that sounds like grounds for immediate removal from the bench." "Patricia, I can explain. You can explain to the Judicial Commission. I'm ordering an immediate investigation into this proceeding. You are suspended from all judicial duties effective immediately." The words hit Judge Sterling like physical blows. Suspended. After 17 years of wielding absolute power, she was being stripped of her authority by a colleague who had been watching her career with growing concern for months. "Patricia, please, you have to understand. What I understand is that you just racially profiled a Supreme Court justice's daughter on live stream, assumed her father was a janitor, and attempted to sentence her to 18 months in jail for a first offense possession charge. Is that understanding correct?" Judge Sterling closed her eyes, knowing that any answer would only make things worse. "Yes." "Then you understand why I have no choice but to remove you from the bench pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the courthouse within the hour." The line went dead, leaving Judge Sterling holding a silent phone in a courtroom that had become her professional graveyard. Outside the Hamilton County Courthouse, news vans were arriving with the efficiency of an invasion force. KPTV, KGW, Coin 6, and Oregon Public Broadcasting had all dispatched crews after social media alerts about a viral courthouse video. National outlets weren't far behind. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News were all preparing segments about the Oregon judge who had publicly humiliated a Supreme Court justice's daughter. Inside the courthouse, Zoe Nakamura was frantically trying to charge her phone while fielding interview requests from news producers. Her simple social justice Instagram account had just broken the biggest judicial misconduct story of the decade, and everyone wanted to talk to her. Zoe Nakamura, a woman in a CNN press badge, approached her in the courthouse lobby. "I'm Sarah Chen from CNN. We'd like to interview you about what you witnessed in that courtroom." "I need to make sure Amara and her grandmother are okay first, but yes, people need to know what happened in there." Back in courtroom 12, David Chen was helping Amara gather her belongings. The orange jail jumpsuit had been replaced with her own clothes, a simple blue dress and cardigan that made her look exactly like what she was, an 18-year-old honor student whose biggest crime was making a mistake that hundreds of thousands of young people made every year. "Ms. Washington," David said quietly, "I want you to know that in 5 years as a public defender, I've never seen anything like what you just did. The courage it took to stand up to Judge Sterling while knowing the consequences, it was remarkable." Amara shook her head. "I shouldn't have had to use my father's position to get fair treatment. Every defendant who comes through that courtroom deserves the same justice, regardless of who their parents are." At 2:47 p.m., exactly 3 hours after Amara's phone call, a black SUV with government plates pulled up to the Hamilton County Courthouse. Justice Malcolm Washington emerged wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who had just witnessed his daughter be subjected to institutional racism on a national stage. At 54, Justice Washington carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades navigating hostile legal environments. He had been confirmed to the Supreme Court after a brutal Senate battle, and he had endured death threats, racist attacks, and constant scrutiny of his qualifications. But watching his daughter face the same systemic bias he had fought his entire career hit differently. The courthouse lobby erupted in camera flashes as reporters recognized him. Justice Washington ignored them all, walking directly to the information desk with purposeful strides. "I'm here to see my daughter, Amara Washington," he told the clerk. "Justice Washington?" The clerk's eyes went wide. She's in conference room B with her attorney, 3rd floor." As Justice Washington walked toward the elevators, reporters shouted questions. "Justice Washington, what's your response to how your daughter was treated? Will you be filing complaints against Judge Sterling? Is this representative of systemic racism in the Oregon courts?"
Justice Washington paused at the elevator doors and turned to face the cameras. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured authority that had commanded respect in the highest court in the land. "I will have a statement later today. Right now, my priority is my daughter." Conference Room B was a small, windowless space, typically used for attorney-client meetings. When Justice Washington opened the door, he found Amara sitting at a small table with David Chen, still processing everything that had happened. "Dad?" Amara stood and walked into her father's arms, finally allowing herself to show the emotion she had held back throughout the entire ordeal. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Justice Washington said quietly, holding his daughter tight. "You should never have had to go through that." "I'm okay, Dad. Really, I kept thinking about all the other kids who come through that courtroom who don't have the option to make a phone call like I did." Justice Washington pulled back to look at his daughter's face. Even after everything she had endured, her first thought was for others facing similar injustice. He had never been prouder or more heartbroken at the same time. "Mr. Chen," Justice Washington turned to David, "thank you for representing my daughter. I understand you've been fighting for fair treatment in Judge Sterling's courtroom for some time." David nodded. "Your Honor, with respect, what happened today wasn't unusual for Judge Sterling's courtroom. It was just the first time it was documented and the first time the defendant had the power to fight back effectively." "How many other defendants has she treated this way?" "Dozens. Maybe hundreds over the years. Young people of color, defendants from low-income families, anyone she perceived as undeserving of mercy." Justice Washington's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about his daughter. This was about systematic abuse of judicial power that had been allowed to continue for 17 years. At 4:30 p.m., Justice Washington stood behind a podium in the courthouse press room, facing a crowd of local and national reporters. Amara stood beside him, no longer the scared teenager in handcuffs, but a young woman who had sparked a national conversation about judicial bias. Today, my daughter was subjected to treatment that no defendant should experience in an American courtroom. Justice Washington began. Judge Sterling made assumptions about my daughter's character, my profession, and our family, based solely on racial stereotypes. The cameras clicked furiously. But this isn't about my daughter's treatment specifically. This is about the thousands of young people who have appeared before Judge Sterling over the years without the benefit of a father who could call and demand accountability. This is about systemic bias that has infected our justice system at every level. A reporter raised her hand. Justice Washington, will you be filing formal complaints? The Oregon Judicial Commission will receive a full complaint documenting not just today's proceeding, but Judge Sterling's pattern of disproportionate sentencing for defendants of color. We will also be requesting a review of every case she has handled over the past 5 years. Another reporter called out, what message does this send about the state of racial justice in America? He looked directly into the cameras. It sends the message that racism persists in our institutions, often hiding behind the veneer of law and order. But it also sends the message that documentation, courage, and accountability can still triumph over bias. He paused, looking at his daughter with obvious pride. My daughter showed remarkable courage today. She faced down institutional racism with dignity and strength, but she shouldn't have had to. No 18-year-old should have to use their father's position to receive fair treatment in a courtroom. Within hours of Justice Washington's press conference, the Oregon Judicial Commission announced a formal investigation into Judge Sterling's conduct. The investigation would be led by retired Oregon Supreme Court Justice Robert Chen, known for his meticulous attention to detail and intolerance for judicial misconduct. Meanwhile, civil rights organizations were mobilizing. The NAACP, ACLU, and Southern Poverty Law Center all announced they would be reviewing Judge Sterling's sentencing patterns for evidence of systematic discrimination. Zoe Nakamura's original livestream had been viewed over 2.3 million times across various platforms. Hashtag Judge Sterling was trending nationwide, and legal experts were calling it one of the clear-cut cases of judicial bias ever caught on video. At her home in Portland's West Hills, Judge Sterling sat in her study surrounded by 17 years of legal awards and commendations. Her phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, and lawyers offering to represent her. She had ignored them all. Her husband, Dr. Richard Sterling, sat across from her with the kind of disappointed expression she had never seen in their 23 years of marriage. Rebecca, how could you not know? How could you not recognize Justice Washington's daughter? I wasn't thinking about who she might be. I was thinking about the pattern. Young, black, drug charges. I've seen it so many times. You've seen what you expected to see. That's the problem.
Rebecca Sterling finally understood what she had lost. Not just her career, but her reputation, her legacy, and the respect of her family. All because she had let bias override basic judicial fairness. 3 days after the courthouse incident, Portland State University's Criminal Justice Reform Institute released a preliminary analysis of Judge Sterling's sentencing patterns over the past 5 years. The statistics were damning.
Black defendants in Judge Sterling's courtroom received sentences 34% longer than white defendants for similar crimes. First-time drug offenders of color were sentenced to jail time 67% more often than white first-time offenders. Judge Sterling had never sentenced a white defendant to more than 6 months for first offense possession, but had sentenced 12 black defendants to over a year for the same charge. The data confirmed what public defenders like David Chen had suspected for years. Judge Sterling's courtroom was a place where justice depended on the color of your skin. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, who led the study, appeared on national television to discuss the findings. What we see in Judge Sterling's courtroom is a textbook example of implicit bias affecting judicial decision-making. The disparities are so stark that they cannot be explained by any factor other than race. Amara's case had sparked something larger than anyone expected. Within a week, similar stories began emerging from across the country. Young defendants who had received harsh sentences from biased judges started sharing their experiences on social media using the hashtag #MyJudgeSterling. The Movement for Judicial Accountability, a national organization advocating for court reform, saw a 400% increase in reports of judicial misconduct. Lawyers began reviewing their clients' cases for patterns of bias. Law schools started incorporating Amara's case into their curricula as an example of systemic racism in the justice system. Zoe Nakamura found herself at the center of a national conversation about the power of citizen journalism. News outlets wanted to interview her. Law schools invited her to speak, and civil rights organizations offered her positions documenting judicial proceedings across the country. "I just happened to be in the right place with a phone," Zoe told CNN, "but this shows how important it is for citizens to witness and document what happens in our courtrooms. Sunshine is the best disinfectant." 2 weeks after the incident in Courtroom 12, Judge Rebecca Sterling faced the Oregon Judicial Commission for her removal hearing. The proceeding was held in the same courthouse where she had once wielded absolute power, but now she sat at the defendant's table while retired Justice Chen presided over her professional execution. The evidence was overwhelming. Video testimony from Zoe's live stream, statistical analysis of sentencing disparities, and testimony from dozens of defendants who had faced Judge Sterling's biased court created an undeniable picture of systematic discrimination. David Chen testified about the pattern of harsh sentences for defendants of color. Angela Foster testified about the prosecution's recommendation for community service that Judge Sterling had ignored. Even Officer Rodriguez testified about Judge Sterling's inappropriate comments about defendants' backgrounds. But the most powerful testimony came from Amara herself. "Your Honors," she said, addressing the 3-judge panel, "what happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unusual. Judge Sterling treated me exactly the way she has treated hundreds of other young people who looked like me. The only difference was that I had the power to fight back."
Amara paused, looking directly at Judge Sterling, who sat with her head down at the defendant's table. "I don't want Judge Sterling destroyed. I want her to understand what she did wrong and help us fix the system that allowed it to happen for 17 years." The Judicial Commission's decision was unanimous. Judge Rebecca Sterling was removed from the bench effective immediately. But the panel also accepted Amara's recommendation for a restorative justice approach. Judge Sterling will be required to complete 200 hours of community service with organizations serving communities of color, Justice Chen announced. She will also participate in a judicial bias training program and share her experience with other judges across the state. It was a humbling fall for someone who had once been considered for the Oregon Supreme Court, but it was also an opportunity for redemption. 6 months later, Rebecca Sterling stood before a group of newly appointed judges at the Oregon Judicial College. sharing her story as part of mandatory bias training. "I spent 17 years believing I was fair," she told the group. "I convinced myself that harsh sentences were necessary to maintain order. I never examined my own assumptions about who deserved mercy and who deserved punishment." She clicked to a slide showing the statistical analysis of her sentencing patterns. "These numbers don't lie. I treated defendants differently based on race, and I destroyed lives because of my bias. Each of you has the power to do the same damage or to do better." Amara's gap year turned into a national movement. Working with the Movement for Judicial Accountability, she traveled to courthouses across America, training citizen journalists to document proceedings and identify patterns of bias. The Amara Protocol became standard practice for court-watching organizations. Systematic documentation of sentencing patterns, demographic analysis of judicial decisions, and real-time social media reporting of concerning proceedings. Within 2 years, 17 judges across 12 states had been disciplined or removed from the bench based on evidence gathered using Amara's methods. Law schools began requiring courses on implicit bias. Bar associations implemented mandatory bias training for all attorneys. Zoe Nakamura parlayed her accidental journalism into a career, founding the Courthouse Transparency Project, which trained citizens to document judicial proceedings and hold courts accountable. David Chen was promoted to Chief Public Defender for Hamilton County, where he implemented new policies for challenging biased judicial behavior and protecting defendants' rights. 3 years after the incident in Courtroom 12, Amara started her freshman year at Harvard Law School, where she planned to study constitutional law and judicial reform. Her admissions essay, titled "The Day I Called My Dad," had become required reading in pre-law programs across the country. Justice Washington kept a framed photo of Amara standing up to Judge Sterling on his Supreme Court office desk. It reminded him daily that the fight for justice wasn't just about landmark cases and constitutional interpretation. It was about individual moments of courage that could change everything. Rebecca Sterling continued her community service and bias training, eventually becoming an advocate for judicial reform. She would never be a judge again, but she found purpose in preventing other judges from making her mistakes. "I lost my career because I let bias override justice, but Amara Washington saved me from losing my humanity." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Justice Washington sat in his home office reviewing cases for the upcoming Supreme Court term. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara, now a second-year law student. "Dad, just watched a live stream of a biased judge in Texas. Reminded me of our call 3 years ago. Some things change, some things don't, but now we have tools to fight back. Love you." Justice Washington smiled, thinking about how one phone call had sparked a national movement for judicial accountability. His daughter's courage had exposed a broken system, but more importantly, it had shown that individual actions could create systemic change. The live stream that started with 47 viewers and grew to millions had proven that transparency, courage, and accountability could still triumph over bias and corruption. Sometimes justice comes from the bench. Sometimes it comes from a jail cell phone call that changes everything. Zoe's original live stream, 6.8 million total views across all platforms. Judges disciplined or removed following similar documentation, 23. States implementing mandatory judicial bias training, 31. Law schools requiring implicit bias education, 127. My Judge Sterling stories shared, over 15,000. The movement for judicial accountability continues Amara's work, ensuring that no young person faces the bias she encountered without someone watching, recording, and demanding justice. The revolution was live-streamed, and justice was served.